I had an idea for a game. It looks like it inherited the same name. So I cloned my item hunt, which I've made some progress on. And I had an idea to turn it into a interactive math game as soon as it finishes importing. I do have some captures. I figured out the grid map yesterday. And it's pretty neat. And it allows you to basically set, you can make an array of meshes and you set a 3D space position with a particular mesh. And each 3D point in space on the grid is unique. And when you set that to a new value, it overwrites it. And so you don't have duplicate meshes. So that is a 10 by 10 cube of the grid map, and it's using 6 different meshes, and it randomly configures them. And then I have a randomly regenerate button. So I have the R button basically as a trigger, and it clears the grid map and then resets all of the values. And so that's what you see there with the jumping is I'm hitting the reset button. And what I'm working on is a way to help with understanding geometry and division concepts. And I think that this would be a great tool to do that. We could build basically a game together that lets the player interact with the objects that they are learning about. So, for example, if you're trying to figure out the volume of a cube, you could define the dimensions that you want using interactive input, and then there can be like a button, for example, of something that would trigger the regeneration. Right now, I would like a button in game, something they could see actually changing and then triggering the reconfiguration of the thing. So this is the actual game world from before. I'm going to undo a lot of this and then start from there. This is a separate project, even though the name is the same here. I just need to change that in the metadata. But basically, I want to keep the player. I want to keep the directional light. I don't think inventory is necessary. I think probably what I'll do is just disable access to it and leave the object for now, just to, yeah, so this has got all of this stuff. So shuffle is the one that regenerates the squares. You can actually do that with the way it's configured now. So if I hit the R button, it'll reconfigure all of the meshes, which takes a bit. You can see the lag. So what I want to do is do that, except have it be done via user interaction, like a physical button they can jump on, and that changes when they jump on it, and then have that reconfigure something around them, whether it's just a simple cube or maybe it's a house. Like what do you get? What is the division of a certain number by another certain number? So you could take the house and divide it by 8, and then you could see now you've got 8 pieces, and they're that much smaller. So we could do things like that. So first, I want to disable the environment generation because we don't want any of that to happen. We want to keep the focus on the math portion of it. So we just want a simple scene, and we do that just by disabling that generate scenery there. So now none of the trees and stuff will spawn. So we've just got a blank slate here. I also want to condense what's being generated here. So I think what I'll do is restore. I have no ground elements, so I think I want to restore that without restoring all of them, because this is an ideal configuration in my other game. This is an ideal configuration to replace with a mesh library and use the grid instance. They have to be reconfigured a bit. Mesh instance has to be the root and has to have a unique name to get the collisions to work. But this is a prime instance of a enhancement that could be made there. But for now, I just want one of these, so I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put it in here, and then let's see here. I want one of the greener ones, kind of like the third one. Let's grab that one and see what it looks like with the lighting. It's light green. Yeah, I think I want that one. So we'll get rid of this. Just call this ground. And then I think that's probably good enough. And maybe we could expand it a bit. The transform properties, scale 1, scale 2. It gives us more room to work with. There's some features already I think that'll be useful for this. The compass could probably go away. The map can probably go away for now. I don't really know how I'd easily disable that. Yeah, here we go. I can just disable this code. Disabled. So that should disable the map, which is previously M, and it does. That's fine. You see there's this awful overlapping collision. We'll fix that in a minute. Compass is gone. Reconfiguration still works. Inventory still works, but I think that's easy enough to disable. I'll just go in here to the player object, which is where player's elements get managed. Inventory is actually outside of the player, but that's beside the point. So here's input. Probably keep the interactable stuff live, but it'll probably change because this is all inventory based. I don't know if we'll have that. We'll probably have like buttons and switches instead. So we don't want inventory toggle. We do have a warp, which is just the home button, and we do have a mouse. This stuff will handle basically the mouse positioning when it's visible, which is right now it's only when the inventory is open, so this will need to change as well. We don't really need an attack, but maybe we just attack a target, and that's how we switch things off and on. So now I've disabled the inventory. Yep, tab doesn't work, and then I doesn't work. Map doesn't work, which is what we want, and then randomization still works, and then the home. Whoops. So yeah, he actually teleports below the grid there. Let's see here. Warp home, spawn position. Spawn position equals vector 0. So that's, we need to change this. So we'll do. What if we just do up? Would that give us 1 in the Y? I think that would. Okay, 1, 2. Yeah, that's good. That puts us back at the spawn. Okay, let's fix the grid real quick. I have a script here. Basically, it's saying we want to generate from -100 to 100, and we're using n here, but this will be used for the x value. And then we're generating -100 to 100 for this m variable, and that'll be the z variable here. And then we're doing it 1 unit below because we were trying to replace the ground. That's what I was doing before. But instead, I want to have them more of a cube, and in which case I actually need to change this to do a further nested loop, and I'm sure there's a much better way to do this, but I'm just going to use the letter O. I probably should use maybe L because it's before M, just for consistency. We'll do range, and we want to change this to be above ground, so I'm going to try from 0 to 10. I think that'll do what I want. And I do still want to generate a random mesh, but then I want to set the cell as I mean, I guess we could We just do X, Y, Z. Let's just do that for clarity. X, Y, Z. And then we'll change the size of these cubes. So this would be a massive cube. And it would actually want to flip these two, because before that was Z and Y was just static. We'll do Y here, Z here. This will give us a massive cube we'll be embedded inside of. Sorry, not a cube, but massive rectilinear box. It's gonna take a while. That's a lot of things to generate. I think it's 40,000. 200 on X, 200 on Y, which is, well, that's 40,000, and then times 10, so 400. It's generating 400,000 meshes, which probably isn't the smartest idea. I'm probably going to get too bored and want to stop this. So I'm going to just see if I can. Yeah, it's overloading. I made a mistake here. This is the mistake. There we go. So we did spawn right inside of it, and I just exited just to move forward with what I'm trying to demonstrate real quick. So let's do 0 to 10 on Y, 0 to 10 on Z, and 0 to 10 on X. That should give us a cube. And there's our cube. So this is kind of my idea, is to use the grid to generate different physical objects. So if we start with a cube and we want to say, okay, divide that cube into 8, and then we could break it apart and just move each subsection, each 8 by 8 subsection, maybe 4 cells away from the center, and that would help them. They could visualize what's happening, so you'd be able to see that it's actually 8 pieces now, much more clearly and interactively. And maybe you could set the divider by, I don't know, hitting an object to increase a count or decrease a count to make it more interactive, or it could be a UI element. I think maybe the physical object makes a lot of sense, because then we can use the attackable logic and say, okay, plus is over here, minus is over here. So we're increasing and reducing the divisor, and then execute would be over here, and then maybe we could have different shapes being generated. So I think there's a lot of potential there. Just hit R a couple times to show the regeneration. I think there's some potential there, and we could use the same grid map and just change which coordinates are being used. I think that would be both interesting and useful. So that's kind of the idea. I want to get started with this state. Let's see what home does. We should put us right next to it. Oh, we're inside of it. Oh, we're right next to it. Perfect. So I'll come up with some maybe even different shapes. I think for now, cube is the simplest. We'll just go with that. Brief overview of what the grid map looks like. I have a terrain mesh library, which is just, I made a handful of cubes, half a dozen cubes, and they are in, the positioning isn't important, but what is important is that when this gets converted to a mesh library, the mesh library converter will look for meshes, and so it'll take anything nested under the mesh and include it in that mesh library, which is really neat. So basically, you can, there's some quirks here. Like, you have to make sure that the mesh instance has a material, and you have to make sure that this material is unique. So if you copy these, they won't be. Let's actually demonstrate that. So if we take the last one and duplicate it, and then move it out, so it's actually those two right there on the left in the center. And if we take this new one we created from the duplication, and we edit it, change the color, it changes both of them, which we don't want, because that is a shared mesh. So to avoid that, we just go here, we find the actual material, we right click on it and say make unique, and then we can change it without interfering with the other one. And I found that to be rather tedious. I'm sure there's a better way. I just haven't found it yet. but that allows us to change those independently. So now I've added one, so I'm actually going to make that a more obnoxious color to make it more obvious. Not really obnoxious, that's fine. We'll do pink, and then we'll save that, and then to convert this to a thing that the grid map can use, we do scene convert to mesh library, and then I have a subdirectory here, and so I'll save it. I'm on my third iteration. I had some problems. It seems to retain some of the meta even after you delete it. So I had some problems and had to create iterative file names to avoid that meta collision. I haven't dug in deep enough to figure out if there's a way to avoid that, but for now, basically I have to assume once I've added a mesh to this, even if I delete it from here and recreate the mesh library, it'll still be there because it doesn't seem to clear them out. So back in our main, probably just delete some of these. So now you see we have our additional mesh instance that we created, and that's from this mesh library. So this is a property on gridmap. So this is a gridmap node. You can see, no, I didn't mean to go to grounds. This is a gridmap node, so you can see it at the top of the thing here. It's inheriting, it's extending from a gridmap. You can actually create as many of these as you want by just adding the node. So here's the second one. So now we can have two independent grid maps if we wanted. Haven't really seen a need to do that yet, at least in this context. So you can see that it actually colored some of the existing ones pink. I don't understand why I did that because those coordinates are already populated with an existing mesh, but it's what it is. I also don't think there's a method to get the length of the mesh library, and there might be. So there might be a sub property on gridmap that I can reference, like gridmap.meshlibrary.length or some such. But what I did is just, there's a set cell item on gridmap itself. Set cell item. So you give it a XYZ coordinate, and then the int, which is a 0 to n positioning of the mesh libraries array, and then orientation is an optional parameter, and I haven't used it yet. But basically, I'm saying, oh, it's this long, which is not great, because then if I say 7, this will throw an error when it tries to get the 7th index of, well, it probably, maybe it's smart enough. So let's try something a little higher. Let's try 99. Maybe it never randomized into the number 7. Yeah, so it seems to be smart enough. Oh, it probably, since it doesn't find one, it's setting it to null. So that's actually kind of neat. So there's a null instance in it's basically a get. It's not a list index lookup. It's a get, and it returns null if it doesn't exist. So that's kind of nice. But I know it's 7 long, so I'll do 0 to 6. I should see some pink ones in there. Oops, there's the inventory. There's the E character. I thought I got rid of that. But yeah, so now we see pink. So that's basically how you do a additional grid map configuration. You don't have to have a script, but I like to attach things on the things that are being used. So here, there's the grid map generation code that just runs at ready time and randomly picks a few numbers. There's actually there's a randomized range of these things here. We could do a more randomized thing here, like random range. Actually, I need RNG dot. So this will be a random int range. Whoops. This will be a random int range on the generator. And there's nothing. So I made a, oh, there it is. So wonder why it didn't generate at runtime. Well, it is now, so I think we're okay. So that's kind of neat. It does randomizes the range. So here we can see that it only picked, I'm actually not sure which is X and which is Z, but looks like in one of the X or Z positions, it randomized to 1, and in the other it randomized to 9, and in the Y it randomized to 10. So that's pretty neat. And then it looks like we've got, it's weird that it shifted over. It really shouldn't be shifting over. It should be starting from the same origin, but that's fine. The randomization isn't really important right now. It's just a fun demo. Oh, I bet I know what's happening. So sometimes it'll do, basically it's going to get X one time, and then for each iteration of X, it's going to get Y, and then sometimes Y will be 0. So that's what, and then same thing for Z. So for each instance of Y, it'll generate a random Z. So this is not a great way to do it. Probably want to do var X equals range random, var Y equals the same, var Z equals the same, and then we would do for x2 in X, y2 in Y, z2 in Z. This should prevent that cascading. So these inner entries had more opportunities to get variation than the initial one. So this should fix that. So now we'll get basically just get one position. So not terribly useful, but it's fun to play around with. So that's it for now. I will work on adding some interactive elements and some triggers for changing the shape.